How do you know this song? The words burst out of Vivian Whitmore before she could stop them, sharp, trembling, slicing through the holiday chatter like a sudden winter wind. John Reed's fingers froze above the Steinway keys. The final note of the melody quivered in the air, unresolved, hanging between them like a fragile truth seconds from shattering. He looked up slowly, startled, almost guilty. "Ma'am?" Vivian stepped closer, heartbeat misfiring, her breath catching the way it had 25 years ago, when a boy named Aaron brushed her cheek with the back of his hand and whispered that he'd written something just for her. She pointed at the keys, voice cracking. "That melody. My first love wrote it. He played it only once. No sheet music, no recordings, no one else knows it." A hush rippled through the Whitmore Tower ballroom. Executives paused mid-sentence. The string quartet lowered their bows, and the Christmas lights flickered softly over a room suddenly too small for the shock it held. John swallowed hard. His uniform, a Navy maintenance shirt with a stitched patch reading J. Reed, looked out of place under the chandeliers, as if the piano itself had chosen a man the room never meant to acknowledge. Beside him, his daughter Naomi clutched his sleeve. "Daddy just plays things he remembers," she said earnestly, unaware of the storm gathering. "I asked him to play something pretty for Christmas." A murmur of amusement and confusion swept through the guests. Vivian didn't hear it. Her pulse roared too loudly in her ears. John gently squeezed Naomi's hand, steadying himself. "It's just an old tune," he said, though the words sounded like a shield rather than an explanation. "No," Vivian whispered. Her eyes glistened. "It's impossible. Only two people ever heard that song, me and him." Before John could answer, a familiar voice intruded, smooth, condescending. "Vivian, darling." "What's going on here?" Derek Cole stepped forward, jaw tense beneath his charming smile. He surveyed John and Naomi with thinly veiled disdain, the kind worn by men who believed hierarchy was a divine right. "Why is the maintenance staff entertaining guests?" he asked, voice dripping with condescension. "And why is there a child here?" Naomi's shoulders drooped. John straightened slightly, protective instinct flaring. "This is a corporate event," Derek continued. "Not a community center." The phrase hung in the air, acidic and ugly. A few guests exchanged uneasy glances. Others pretended not to notice. It wasn't the first time someone like Derek had spoken to someone like John that way. Vivian stepped between them so quickly Derek blinked. "Apologize." "For what?" "For speaking to them like that." A tense beat passed. Vivian's spine was straight, her CEO face carved from resolve, and something deeper hurt, fear, and a strange urgency she didn't understand. Derek forced out a thin smile. "My apologies," he said, though it carried no sincerity. "Just trying to maintain order." "Order isn't cruelty," Vivian snapped softly. John lifted Naomi into his arms, murmuring something reassuring as she rested her head on his shoulder. Vivian's chest tightened unexpectedly at the sight, the tenderness, the quiet dignity. "Mr. Reed," she tried again, her voice gentler, "please, tell me where you learned that piece." John hesitated. His eyes dropped to his right hand, the faint scars tight under the chandelier's glow. "Some tunes stay with you," he said quietly, "even when you don't know why." Vivian's breath hitched. The phrasing, the inflection. It was too close to what Aaron used to say. Before she could press further, a manager rushed over. "John, we need you in the west corridor. The heating unit's down again." John nodded gratefully, escape granted. He shifted Naomi in his arms. "Thank you for the hospitality, Miss Whitmore." "Wait," Vivian whispered. But he was already turning away. Naomi looked back over her father's shoulder. "Merry Christmas, Miss." Vivian felt the words like an unexpected warmth against her cold, polished exterior. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," she replied softly. She watched them exit the ballroom, John's steady stride, Naomi's sleepy trust wrapped around his neck, a simple father and daughter, disappearing into a building he repaired but did not belong to. But the melody remained. Oh God, the melody remained. Vivian pressed a hand against her chest as the string quartet resumed playing something light and festive, as if nothing had happened. But something had. Something enormous. The notes John played had matched Aaron's opening exactly, every breath, every hesitation, except for one detail. That flourish in the middle. A tender arc of notes that shouldn't exist. Aaron never played that part. It wasn't his. It carried a different emotion, entirely older, quieter, weighted with years of loss. As if the song had lived a second life in someone else's hands, Vivian closed her eyes, feeling the room tilt slightly. Memories she had packed away crept back, nights in dingy practice rooms, Aaron composing under flickering lights, humming fragments of love he never finished. But those rooms weren't always empty. Students drifted in and out. Quiet ones. Observant ones. Sometimes a boy would sit at the back, head low, absorbing everything like a sponge absorbing rain. Her breath tightened. No, it can't be. Yet the question clawed forward. Had Aaron's unfinished melody found its way into another young musician's hands all those years ago? A young musician who stood now before her, grown, wounded, and unknowingly carrying a piece of her past? The ballroom felt colder suddenly, as if the air itself recognized destiny unfolding. Vivian steadied herself, unaware she was whispering aloud. Justice doesn't disappear. It waits. Her father's voice boomed somewhere behind her, greeting guests with politician-like ease. Derek laughed too loudly at a donor's joke. Glasses clinked. But none of it mattered. A song thought dead had returned to life, played by a man who should never have known it. A man with scars on his hands and secrets in his silence. And as Vivian stood alone in that glittering room, one truth settled over her with chilling certainty. This was not an accident. If that moment shocked you the way it shocked Vivian, hit the like button. And tell us in the comments, what would you do if a stranger played the most intimate song of your past? John Reed walked quickly through the service corridor, boots tapping against polished concrete. Naomi's small arms looped around his neck like a lifeline. The faint echo of the ballroom music trailed behind them, but the melody he had played, the one he should never have known, kept pulsing through his mind in stubborn, unsettling waves. Naomi sleepily pressed her cheek against his shoulder. "Daddy, did I mess things up?" "No, baby girl," John whispered, adjusting her gently. "You were perfect. You always are." But his stomach churned. Something had cracked open in that ballroom, something he spent years burying. When they reached the maintenance lounge, he set Naomi on the couch, covering her with his old work jacket. She curled into it immediately. It still smelled faintly of cedar oil and laundry soap, his scent, the one she clung to on the nights she woke crying from dreams of losing him. John leaned against the wall and rubbed the scarred knuckles of his right hand. The skin felt tight, the nerves flickering like faulty wires. Years ago, these fingers danced across ivory keys with precision and grace. Tonight, they trembled. He hadn't meant to play that melody. Naomi had asked him to play something pretty, and without warning, the tune had risen in him the way old grief rises uninvited, unwelcome, yet impossible to silence. A soft buzz came from the fluorescent lights overhead. John flinched at the metallic hum. Ever since the accident, any sharp metallic sound set his nerves on edge. He took a slow breath, counting like his physical therapist once taught him. 1, 2, 3. A door opened quietly. "Mr. Reed?" The soft voice startled him. He turned to find Mrs. Langford, the building's evening security supervisor, a kind woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair, reading glasses perched on her head. She always treated him with a warmth many tenants didn't. "I saw you leaving in a hurry," she said. "Everything all right?" Her tone wasn't nosy, just motherly. John exhaled. Just a long night. She studied him with the intuition of someone who had raised 3 sons and survived things far heavier than workplace drama. "That song you played," she said gently. It reached the hallway. Sounded like sorrow wrapped in something hopeful. John forced a small smile. "Old tune from long ago." "Old tunes don't make a man look like he's seen a ghost," she replied softly. John didn't answer. Mrs. Langford didn't push. Instead, she placed a warm hand on his shoulder. "Whatever storm that music stirred up, don't let it drown you, son. Son." The word carried a tenderness he hadn't felt from anyone older in years. He nodded gratefully, then she quietly excused herself, leaving him with the hum of the lights and the weight of his past pressing harder. 10 minutes later, the heating unit call came through his radio false alarm, something Derek probably triggered to pull him away. John returned to the lounge, scooping Naomi carefully into his arms. As he stepped outside into the cold Georgia night, snowflakes drifted under the streetlights, rare, soft, almost magical. Naomi stirred. "Is it Christmas snow, Daddy?" "Looks like it," he said. "Can we make hot cocoa when we get home?" "Of course." She smiled sleepily. "With the tiny marshmallows?" "Always." The drive home in his old Ford F-150 was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the soft sound of Naomi's breathing. Atlanta's skyline shimmered distantly, a world away from the neighborhood where John lived. East Point, modest homes, peeling porches, families scraping by but watching out for one another. As he pulled into the small apartment complex, Mr. Turner from 1B waved from his lawn chair despite the cold. "Evenin', John. Little one asleep?" "Yeah," John whispered back. "Long night." Turner nodded knowingly. "They work you like you're 10 men." John didn't disagree. Inside their apartment, worn but clean, John laid Naomi in her bed, her room decorated with dollar store stars taped to the ceiling and drawings of pianos she insisted he would play on a big stage one day. John brushed a curl from her forehead. "Good night, Starshine." She murmured, "Daddy." That lady was sad. The pretty one in the sparkly dress. Vivian Whitmore. Sad. Beautiful. And shaken to her core. "Maybe," John said softly. "But that's not our worry." Naomi opened one eye. The song made her cry inside, didn't it? Children saw too much. "Go to sleep, sweetheart." After turning off the light, John walked to the living room, lowering himself carefully into the old recliner. His right hand tingled, the lingering ache of damage no surgery had fully undone. He stared at it, remembering the day everything changed. The collapsing rig, the scream, the weight slamming down, the sound of metal crushing bone, and afterward, the lies written in official reports, performer error, failure to follow safety protocol. They had blamed him to cover for the company that cut costs on faulty equipment. The company connected to the Whitmore empire. "Just let it go," he muttered to himself. Past is past. But the melody wouldn't let him. He hadn't played Winter Promise since he was 18. Back then, he had been just a kid sneaking into practice rooms at the community college where Aaron sometimes rehearsed. Aaron, the white kid with the gentle hands and burning talent, had never noticed John sitting quietly at the back, listening, absorbing. John had never spoken to him, never dared, but the music had passed between them like a secret language. Aaron played the beginning of Winter Promise again and again, trying to find an ending. John found one silently, alone, late at night, notes born from a place Aaron never lived long enough to reach grief. Responsibility, the weight of surviving things you never chose. John whispered into the empty room. "I shouldn't have played it tonight." But something had pulled the song from him the way storms pull waves to shore, inevitable, restless, aching. Meanwhile, across the city in her penthouse suite, Vivian Whitmore sat on the edge of her bed staring at the cassette tape Aaron gave her decades ago. She hadn't dared listen to it since the funeral. Tonight, her hands shook as she held it. She whispered John's name, though she barely knew him. It tasted strange and heavy on her tongue, and somewhere deep inside her, a thought bloomed like a danger signal. That man knows something about Aaron, something I'm not ready for. Back in East Point, John closed his eyes, exhausted. The heater rattled softly, its metallic clicking twisting like a memory he couldn't escape. He whispered a promise he'd made to himself long ago. Naomi comes first, always. Nothing and no one pulls us into trouble again. But destiny had already awakened. A song had been played. A past had been stirred, and two lives, one of power, one of quiet survival, had begun circling the same truth. As John finally drifted into uneasy sleep, one last thought clawed through him, sharp as cold air. What if she keeps asking questions? The melody answered for him, echoing faintly in his mind. Then nothing stays buried. Vivian Whitmore had not slept. She had drifted between shallow dreams and sharp memories, none of which obeyed the distance of time. The city outside her penthouse window was still dark, Atlanta's skyline glowing faintly under the winter dawn, but her mind was bright with the echo of a melody that should have died 25 years ago, a melody a maintenance worker somehow carried in his hands. She sat on the edge of her bed, silk robe gathered around her, bare feet resting on the cold hardwood floor. Her reflection stared back at her from the window, polished, composed, successful to the outside world but visibly cracked now, the fracture running straight through her guarded composure. She lifted the cassette tape again. The label faded, Aaron's handwriting softly smudged over the decades. She traced it with her thumb. "How did he know your song?" she whispered into the quiet room. There was no answer, of course. There hadn't been answers for years, just a lingering ache shaped like a boy who loved music more than life and loved her more than music. Vivian finally forced herself up and moved into the kitchen. She brewed coffee the way she always did, slow pour-over, Kenyan roast, but even the familiar ritual couldn't steady her racing mind. Her phone buzzed at 6:12 a.m. Derek, of course. She ignored it. Buzzed again. Then again, 3 calls, back to back. She let it go to voicemail. The 4th time, she answered, if only to stop the noise. "Vivian." Derek snapped before she could speak. "We need to talk. Last night was a disaster. You embarrassed me in front of clients." She sipped her coffee. "I corrected you," she said. "You were rude." "Rude? To a janitor?" His annoyance sharpened. "Vivian, you're letting emotions cloud your judgment." Her jaw tightened. "You don't know what I'm thinking." "No. But I know what they were thinking. Investors were watching. Appearances matter. And you defending him, I defended his dignity." She cut in. "Something you might try." The silence that followed was telling. Derek recalibrated his tone, shifting from anger to the sweetened edge he used when he wanted something. "Darling, listen. You've been stressed. Your father's retiring, the company's shifting, and with the engagement party coming up. Stop." Her voice dropped to a cold whisper. "We will discuss this later." "We'd better," Derek muttered. "Because whatever this is, you're risking everything we're building." She hung up without responding. She let the silence pool around her like water rising in an empty tank. Derek didn't understand. No one understood. Not yet. At 7:30 a.m., she forced herself into her usual morning routine. A run on the treadmill, a cold shower, hair tied into a sleek knot, navy suit tailored to a precision that suggested control she no longer felt. But today, something was off. When she passed by the framed newspaper article of her father, George Whitmore, real estate visionary, she felt a jolt of unease. Her father had built an empire, but at what cost? By 8:30, she was in the back seat of her town car, the driver weaving through downtown traffic toward Whitmore Tower. She stared out the tinted window as pedestrians hurried through the cold baristas, secretaries, construction crews, people with tired eyes and heavy backpacks, people like John Reed, whose names would never grace a building but who kept the entire city running. For the first time in years, she wondered how many lives her father's company had shaped and how many it had quietly crushed. When she entered the lobby, employees greeted her with polite nods, their voices soft and respectful. "Morning, Miss Whitmore." "Good morning, ma'am." She moved through them like she always did, gracious, yet distant. Being CEO meant walls, and she had built hers high. But now the walls felt unsteady, as if a single melody had found the cracks. She took the executive elevator to the 39th floor, stepped into her office, and found her father already there, sitting in her chair like the throne still belonged to him. "Morning, sweetheart," George Whitmore said, turning slowly. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his suit immaculate, his smile charming in that politician's way that fooled everyone but her. "You left early last night." I wasn't feeling well. He steepled his fingers, studying her. I heard about the scene you caused. She stiffened. I corrected rudeness. You undermined your fiancé in public. He insulted an employee. George shrugged. Hierarchy exists for a reason. She froze. The words sounded too close to Derek's. What do you mean by that? George leaned back. These people, working class, transient workers, whatever they call themselves, they come and go. But we cannot allow them to disrupt order. Order, she repeated softly. At any cost? He smiled. You're learning. Something cold slid down her spine. Her father had always valued power, but had he valued it enough to bury truths she never learned? She forced her voice steady. Dad. There was a man last night. He played a melody only Aaron ever knew, a melody that was never published. George paused. Barely. But she saw it. His eyes hardened for a fraction of a second before he masked it. Coincidence, he said. Music recycles itself. Not this music, Vivian, he said firmly. Do not go chasing ghosts. The past is dead, and if it isn't, then bury it. The finality in his tone chilled her, but instead of obeying, something in her rebelled quietly, fiercely. I need to follow up on something, she said, gathering her tablet. A personal matter. Make sure your personal matters don't interfere with the company, George warned. We can't afford distractions. She walked past him, pulse pounding. Maybe you can't afford the truth, she thought. But she could. She was ready to. She headed straight for HR, requesting John Reed's employment records. As she waited, her mind replayed the moment in the ballroom, his trembling hands, the familiar notes, the ache in his eyes as if the song hurt him too. No, this wasn't coincidence. This was a thread. A thin, fragile thread linking her past to a man she barely knew. And if life had taught her anything, it was this. Threads existed to be pulled. Meanwhile, miles away, John packed Naomi's school lunch while glancing anxiously at the clock. If Vivian Whitmore started asking questions, everything he'd spent years protecting could unravel. He tightened the lid on Naomi's thermos and whispered under his breath, "Just keep your head down. Don't get involved. Not again." But fate, once awakened, rarely lets go. And both of them, John in his small kitchen, Vivian in her corner office, felt the same pull, the same whisper beneath their worries. Nothing stays buried. By the time Vivian entered the ballroom again that afternoon, the holiday decorations looked different to her, less festive, more like props arranged to disguise a truth the company didn't want anyone to examine. The towering Christmas tree glittered with ornaments shaped like skyscrapers, little silver tributes to Whitmore Realty's empire. She wondered how many of those buildings rested on quiet compromises, buried mistakes, or broken lives like John's. She forced herself toward the operations wing, tablet in hand. HR had sent the basic file on John Reed work history, emergency contact, performance notes. But that wasn't what she needed. She needed what the file refused to say. In the corridor, she nearly collided with Derek. He was speaking to a group of investors, all tailored suits and polished watches. When he saw her, his smile sharpened like a blade. "Vivian," he said smoothly, dismissing the others with a nod, "we have unfinished business." She had no patience for him today. Not now. Yes, now. He stepped in front of her, blocking the path. "Why are you digging into this janitor's life?" "Maintenance technician," she corrected. "Enough," Derek hissed, lowering his voice. "You're making yourself look unstable. A CEO cannot appear sympathetic to people like him." Vivian felt something inside her snap. A thin, fierce line of anger, clean, precise. "People like him?" she repeated quietly. Derek hesitated but pushed forward. "Look, sweetheart, let me handle the lower-level issues. You focus on your role. Investors trust you because you stay above these distractions." "Dignity isn't a distraction," she said coldly. "It's a measure of character. This is about Aaron, isn't it?" Derek blurted, and her breath faltered. "You hear some song that reminds you of your dead boyfriend, and suddenly you're..." She slapped him. Not hard, not dramatic, but enough to cut his sentence clean. Derek staggered back, stunned. His shock quickly twisted into ambition-fueled rage. "Don't ever do that again," he whispered, "or I will show you exactly how fast a CEO can fall." She stepped around him without replying, but her pulse was shaking. She hated that he saw a piece of the truth. Yes, it was about Aaron, but it was also about something bigger, something that touched more than memory, something that felt like justice stirring awake. She reached the operations office and spotted someone she rarely noticed in years past. Mrs. Langford, the evening security supervisor, speaking softly to a younger guard. Vivian approached her. "Mrs. Langford, may I ask you something?" The older woman gave her a warm smile, the kind Vivian rarely received outside of PR events. "Of course, Miss Whitmore. Last night, did you see Mr. Reed after he left the ballroom?" Mrs. Langford nodded. "Yes, ma'am. He looked shaken. Not by your confrontation, by the music, I think." "The music," Vivian whispered. "He said it was an old tune. Some songs," the older woman replied gently, "only resurface when someone's heart is ready to face them again." Vivian stared at her, momentarily disarmed. "Do you believe that?" "Honey," Langford said, adjusting her glasses, "I've lived 60 years. My heart's confronted all sorts of songs." Vivian almost smiled, but she didn't have time for comfort. She moved on, heels tapping sharply, each step echoing her rising determination. She needed to confront John. Today, she stopped at the maintenance office, a cramped space full of tools, spare parts, and the faint scent of industrial cleaner. But John wasn't there. Instead, she found a young technician sorting wires. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Vivian straightened. "I'm looking for John Reed. Is he on shift?" "He switched to night rotation today," the tech said. "Didn't say why. Just seemed like he wanted to avoid something." Avoid her, she realized. Her presence. Her questions. The truth she hadn't yet named. She thanked the young man and stepped into the quiet hallway. A strange heaviness pressed on her chest. Why would he run? What was he afraid she would discover? She passed a window overlooking the city, Atlanta glowing in fractured winter light. Her own reflection appeared in the glass, eyes tired but burning with something fierce and restless. She didn't want to admit the truth forming inside her. If John knew how to finish Aaron's melody, if the emotion woven through those added notes came from his life, then maybe their stories had touched long before she realized. And maybe pain had traveled from Aaron's lost world into John's surviving one. She made a decision in that moment. She would not let Derek, or her father, or fear smother this lead. She would follow it. Even if it meant peeling back layers of the Whitmore empire her father never wanted exposed. That evening, when the tower had emptied and most executives left for dinner reservations in Buckhead, Vivian waited in the dimly lit corridor outside the maintenance wing. She wasn't sure what she would say to John. She only knew she needed answers, not about the company, not yet, but about the melody tying her heart to a man who had every reason to hate her world. Footsteps approached, heavy, steady, familiar. John turned the corner carrying a toolbox. The moment he saw her, he stopped as if the ground tilted. "Miss Whitmore," he said slowly, "is something broken?" She studied him, his guarded posture, the fatigue etched around his eyes, the tension in the hand that once created music. "Yes," she said softly. "Something is." He blinked, thrown off. She stepped closer, but not enough to crowd him. "We need to talk." "With respect, ma'am," he said carefully. "There's nothing to talk about." "There is," she insisted. "You played a song you shouldn't know, and it shook you as much as it shook me." His jaw tightened. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't." Her voice softened. "You stirred a truth that's been buried for decades." He looked away. "And some things should stay buried." "Not this," she whispered. He took a breath, shoulders rising slightly. "Miss Whitmore, you're from a world that can afford to chase ghosts. I can't. I have a daughter, a life to protect." Questions only bring trouble. Not all questions, she said. Some bring clarity, healing. Not for people like me. The phrase hit her like a blow. She hated hearing it. Hated knowing it was true in his experience. Mr. Reed, she said quietly, I don't want to hurt you. I just want to understand. He shook his head, stepping back. Understanding doesn't change the past. It might change the future. The hallway fell still. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then John finally said, voice low, please, let this go. He walked past her before she could respond. She didn't stop him, but she didn't accept his request either. Because in the space he left behind, she felt it clearly, an undeniable pull. Something fragile and dangerous, threaded with justice and memory. And it whispered the same thing over and over. This is only the beginning. Vivian barely slept that night. Even after she left the tower, drove through the quiet winter streets, and returned to her immaculate penthouse overlooking the city, her mind refused to settle. The conversation with John replayed in her head in loops, his guarded eyes, the way his shoulders tightened at the mention of the melody, his plea for her to let it go. That plea only made her more certain she couldn't. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and she felt it moving beneath the surface like a fault line ready to split. By morning, she was back at Whitmore Tower before anyone else. The building was still cold, lights buzzing on as motion sensors detected her presence. She made her way to the legal archives, a restricted department few CEOs ever bothered entering personally. But Vivian wasn't interested in convenience. She wanted the truth. She greeted Mr. Gallman, the legal archivist, a thin man in his 60s with wire-framed glasses and a habit of speaking only when necessary. He blinked in surprise when he saw her. Miss Whitmore, we weren't expecting. I need records, Vivian said. Old ones. Construction liability reports from the mid-2000s. Any tied to performance hall contracts. His eyebrows lifted slightly. That's unusual. So am I, she replied. Please. Minutes later, she sat alone at a long wooden table, flipping through digital logs and dusty binders. There were dozens of documents, hundreds even, spanning years of construction deals. Most were routine. Some were questionable. But one file stopped her cold. Incident report. Fulton County Community Arts Pavilion. Rigging collapse. 2007. Her pulse jumped. She opened the file. The summary was sterile, written in corporate language crafted to soften disaster. Accident resulting from performer misuse of overhead equipment. No structural negligence found. Case dismissed. But at the bottom, a familiar name appeared like a crack through glass. General Contractor Oversight. Whitmore Construction Group. Vivian stared at it long enough for the letters to blur. She whispered softly, Dad, what did you do? She scrolled further. One photograph was embedded, a blurry image of the collapsed rig, metal beams twisted like broken ribs. Another image showed a young man being lifted onto a stretcher, paramedics rushing. Blood streaked his arm. His hand was mangled. Vivian felt her breath falter as she leaned closer. Even blurry, even injured, there was no mistaking those features. John, she whispered. Her stomach tightened as realization hit. He hadn't just been injured. His injury happened under Whitmore's watch, under her family's name. A sickness settled into her bones. She stood abruptly, making the chair screech across the floor. Gallman peeked in. Everything all right, ma'am? Nothing is all right, she murmured. Not anymore. She took photographs of the documents, something she hadn't done since law school. When she left the archives, her heels clicked sharply against the marble floors, her determination tightening with each step. But she didn't go to her office. Instead, she headed to the mezzanine cafe, where she found someone she trusted enough to ask questions. Her administrative assistant, Denise. Denise was in her early 50s, dignified, sharp, with the sort of intuition only black women in corporate America seemed to carry, an ability to see through people and their motivations with startling clarity. Vivian slid into the chair across from her. Do you know anything about the rigging accident in 2007? she asked quietly. Denise's eyes narrowed slightly. That old case? Yes. Why bring it up now? Vivian hesitated, then leaned forward. Because someone who works for us was hurt in that accident. Seriously hurt. His career ended because of it. Denise inhaled softly. Who? John Reed. Denise froze. The silence between them grew heavy. Finally, she said, If your family was involved, proceed carefully. People get hurt when big names try to clean up messes. Vivian nodded. I think people already got hurt. Denise's gaze softened. Be sure you want to open that door, Miss Vivian. Once you start looking for truth, you can't unsee it. I do want to see it, Vivian whispered. Maybe for the first time in years. Before Denise could respond, a booming voice echoed through the cafe. There you are. Vivian's body stiffened. Derek approached with long strides, smiling politely at Denise but locking eyes with Vivian with the cold sharpness of a man who felt his control slipping. We need to talk, he said through clenched teeth. About your behavior yesterday. My behavior? She replied calmly. Yes, Derek hissed, lowering his voice. You've been unpredictable, erratic. It concerns people. No, she corrected. It concerns you. You're damn right it concerns me, he snapped. We're weeks from announcing our engagement. Everything you do reflects on me, on us. You, defending that janitor, maintenance technician, she snapped. I don't care what he is. Derek spat before catching himself. His smile returned too quickly, brittle around the edges. Look, sweetheart, just stay focused. Don't wander into irrelevant matters. Vivian stared at him, realizing for the first time that she didn't recognize the man she was engaged to, or perhaps she never wanted to. That irrelevant matter, she said quietly, is a man whose life was destroyed by a decision made under the Whitmore name. Derek blinked, confused, irritated. What are you talking about? You wouldn't understand. She stood. He grabbed her wrist, not hard, but with an entitled pressure that made Denise stand halfway from her seat. Vivian pulled away immediately. Don't touch me, she said. Derek's jaw flexed. We're talking later. We're not, she replied, and walked away. She didn't look back. Instead, she made her way to the 12th floor, Records and Safety Department. She requested access logs, inspection reports, anything related to the contractor. It took an hour, but the picture grew clearer and uglier. Corners had been cut, safety protocols ignored, cost reductions approved by someone very high up. There were signatures, approvals, and then the final blow. A memo from George Whitmore. Proceed with cost-saving measures immediately. This project is low visibility, risk minimal. Vivian's throat tightened. Her father had known the dangers, the company had known, yet they let cheap scaffolding hold the weight of young performers' dreams. And one of those dreams, John's, collapsed under it. She sat there trembling, the memo glowing on the screen. She whispered, He was hurt because of us. Guilt settled into her chest, cold and relentless. But woven into that guilt was something else. Anger. At her father, at Derek, at the system that chose profit over people like John, at herself, for never questioning any of it. She closed the screen slowly. A song had brought John back into her world, but justice was what kept him there. She stood, gathering her things. She wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. She was uncovering the truth, and whether her father liked it or not, she was going to find out exactly how deep the fault lines ran, because something inside her had awakened, a conviction sharp enough to cut through years of silence, a conviction whispering one unshakable truth. Justice doesn't disappear. It waits for someone brave enough to claim it. John Reed felt uneasy the entire morning. The kind of unease that didn't come from a single event, but from the slow accumulation of too many truths pressing on his chest. He knew exactly when the feeling started, when Vivian Whitmore appeared in the maintenance corridor the night before, eyes burning with questions he wasn't ready to answer, questions he'd spent 16 years avoiding. As he tightened a valve on a boiler in the lower levels of the tower, his right hand trembled. The tingling sensation shot up his wrist, a reminder of the damage no therapy had fully undone. Pain flared when he gripped too hard. He loosened his hold, breathing slow. The boiler hissed, echoing faintly like the sound of metal collapsing. The same metallic scream burned into his memory from the night the rigging fell. He closed his eyes, and the past swallowed him whole. 16 years ago, he had been a quiet 18-year-old kid with a second-hand keyboard and more dreams than money. The community arts pavilion had been his sanctuary. He practiced there late at night because nobody cared enough to lock it properly. Sometimes, when he arrived early, he would hear someone else practicing Aaron, with the gentle fingers and soft voice. Aaron who hummed melodies like secrets, melodies that made John pause in the hallway and listen with a reverence he never dared express. That unfinished melody, Winter Promise, had lived in John longer than any dream he ever dared claim. He had sat alone in the darkened hall, finishing the phrase Aaron couldn't resolve, letting his fingers find the emotion Aaron never lived long enough to reach. Then the accident happened. One moment he had been adjusting a mic stand, waiting for the rehearsal crowd to arrive. The next moment, a groaning sound filled the rafters, followed by a catastrophic crack. John threw himself toward the violinist standing beneath the rigging, pushing her away just as the metal structure collapsed. Pain consumed everything white, blinding, shattering. The last thing he remembered was someone screaming, "Hold on," before darkness drowned him. Now, all these years later, that memory still felt like an open wound. John shook his head to clear it. He finished securing the valve and stepped back. His radio buzzed. "John, we've got a flickering light in Conference Hall C. Think you can check it before lunch?" He lifted the radio. On it. As he walked through the corridors, he noticed people watching him more than usual. Whispers, curious glances. The song he'd played had traveled through the building faster than truth ever did. When he reached the conference hall, he found Garrett, one of the younger technicians, already on a ladder. "Got it halfway fixed," Garrett said. "Thought you might want to take a look. You're better with wiring." John nodded and steadied the ladder. Garrett climbed down, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Hey, you okay? You look stressed." John forced a shrug. "Long night." Garrett hesitated. "People are talking, you know, about you playing that song, about Miss Whitmore reacting like she saw a ghost." "It was nothing," John muttered. "Sounded like something," Garrett said, though not unkindly. "I mean, when a CEO looks at you like that, people notice." John didn't respond. Garrett shifted awkwardly. "Look, man, just be careful. Folks up top, they don't like surprises, especially involving their personal lives." That much, John already knew. After Garrett left, John climbed the ladder to rewire the light. His hand cramped halfway through, pain slicing across his scar as he forced the connection into place. The bulb flickered, then steadied. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. He descended carefully. When he reached the bottom, he found Naomi standing in the doorway, holding a paper bag. She grinned. "Daddy, I brought you your lunch. Miss Langford said it was okay if I waited here until your break." John's heart softened instantly. "You walked all the way up here?" "Miss Langford came with me." Naomi stepped forward proudly. "I made you a peanut butter sandwich, but I used the crunchy peanut butter because you said it tastes like Saturdays." John chuckled, lifting her into his arms. "It does taste like Saturdays." Naomi studied his face. "Are you okay, Daddy? You look sad." "I'm just tired," he said gently. "Grown-up tired." She nodded with exaggerated seriousness, like when Mr. Turner says his feet hurt because he's been standing since the 1,970 seconds. Exactly like that. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You can tell me things, you know. Even grown-up things." Emotion tightened his throat. "I know, sweet girl." She paused. "Is it about the lady in the sparkly dress?" John almost dropped the sandwich. "What?" "The lady who looked like she was crying inside," Naomi said thoughtfully. "You played the sad song and she got sadder. Did you hurt her heart?" He couldn't speak for a moment. Then he managed. "It's complicated." "Oh." She nodded. "Like math?" "Yes," he whispered. "Exactly like math." After they ate together, Naomi skipped back to the lobby under Mrs. Langford's watchful eye. John returned to his tasks, but his mind wasn't focused. Vivian had dug something up. He could feel it in the air. His instincts rarely betrayed him. Just after noon, when he stepped into the basement hallway to retrieve spare filters, he found two men in suits waiting. Not police, not investors, worse corporate counsel. One of them checked a clipboard. "John Reed?" "Yes, we need a word." John stiffened. "About what?" "Miss Whitmore requested further review of an incident concerning your past." The corridor seemed to shrink. His voice dropped to a whisper. No, she didn't. We'll need to verify some information regarding an accident report from 2007. Ice slid through his veins. He knew instantly what file she had found. "I have nothing to say about that," John said firmly. "That case was closed." "Closed incorrectly," the taller man replied. "It appears new interest has been raised." "I didn't raise it." "No," the man said, adjusting his tie. "She did." John's pulse hammered. He felt the old fear rising, fear of lawsuits, of retaliation, of losing the fragile life he had built for Naomi. He stepped back, shaking his head. "I'm not opening that door again." The man's expression remained flat. "Whether you open it or not, Mr. Reed, Miss Whitmore already has." John walked away without another word, barely holding himself together. As he rounded the corner, he pressed his back to the wall and let the weight of the truth sink in. Vivian Whitmore was digging. Hard, deep, and whether she meant to or not, she was dragging him back toward the ruins of a life he had barely survived. He whispered to no one, "Why couldn't you just leave it buried?" His hand throbbed again, the old injury pulsing like a warning. He understood then, painfully, that the song wasn't the only thing that had resurfaced. Trouble had too, and neither was going away. Vivian stood outside the old brick building of the Atlanta School of Music, her breath forming pale clouds in the crisp afternoon air. The place hadn't changed much since she last stepped through its doors more than 2 decades ago. The paint was still peeling in familiar corners, the courtyard fountain still didn't work, and the air still hummed faintly with somebody practicing in some forgotten room. She didn't know why she was nervous. She was the CEO of a billion-dollar company, accustomed to facing boards, reporters, and men far more intimidating than an aging music professor. Yet as she walked into the building, she felt like the 20-year-old girl who once followed a boy with a guitar case and a crooked smile into practice rooms lit by flickering bulbs. The receptionist, a young woman chewing peppermint gum, directed her upstairs. "Professor Harris is in room 214. Vivian thanked her and followed the familiar hallway. The smell hit her first dust, wood polish, and the faint sweetness of old sheet music. She paused at the doorway, steadying herself before knocking. Inside, Professor Harris looked exactly as she remembered him, slightly hunched, white hair scattered like dandelion threads, glasses perched on the edge of his nose. He sat at an upright piano, tapping out scales with his left hand. When he turned and saw her, his eyes widened. "Good heavens, Vivian Whitmore." She smiled softly. "It's been a long time, Professor." "Too long," he said, shuffling toward her for a warm, grandfatherly hug. "I heard about your rise in the real estate world. Your father must be proud." A complicated ache stirred inside her, but she pushed it aside. "I'm here because I need your help." "Of course." He motioned for her to sit. "What is it?" She swallowed hard. "I need to ask you about Aaron." The professor's expression softened immediately, lines deepening around eyes that had seen too many talented young musicians leave too soon. "Ah, Aaron, brightest spark that ever walked through these halls. I still miss that boy." Vivian nodded, her throat tightening. "Do you remember a melody he used to work on? Winter Promise?" His eyebrows rose. "That one?" "Of course. He started it the year before he passed. Did he ever finish it?" "No. He could never figure out the direction of the second movement," Harris said, tapping his chin. Brilliant as he was, even he knew it needed a depth he hadn't yet lived. Vivian leaned forward. "Professor, I heard someone play Winter Promise 2 nights ago, but with an added phrase in the middle, one Aaron never played. It was older, sadder, but perfect." The professor blinked. Then slowly, his expression shifted, not to surprise, but to recognition. "Play it for me," he said. Vivian hesitated. "I don't remember it well enough to do it justice." "Describe it then." She closed her eyes. The melody rose again in her memory. John's trembling hands, the aching tenderness of each note, the delicate phrase that carried a lifetime of unspoken longing. She hummed it softly. When she finished, the professor stared at her with a look she didn't understand. "That wasn't Aaron," he said quietly. "Not that middle phrase." "I know. That's why I'm here." The professor leaned back in his chair, thinking. Then he said something that made Vivian's pulse stop. There was a boy, a quiet one, sat in the back during Aaron's late-night practice sessions. I don't think Aaron ever noticed him, but the boy noticed everything. Vivian's breath caught. "A boy?" "Yes," Harris said. "He'd slip in after cleaning shifts. Poor kid, always alone. But when he touched the piano, he looked at her over his glasses. He played like someone twice his age, someone who carried the world but refused to set it down." Vivian whispered, "What was his name?" The professor frowned, searching his memory. "Reed. John Reed." The room seemed to tilt. Vivian gripped the edge of her chair. "John was here? With Aaron?" "Often," Harris replied. "Aaron wrote the beginning of Winter Promise, but he used to say he heard the ending in his head but couldn't reach it yet." The professor's eyes softened. "I think that boy John understood the ending before Aaron ever did." Their music intertwined. Vivian felt her heart slam against her ribs. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Professor Harris smiled gently. "You were grieving, dear, and he was just invisible to most people. But not to music." The truth settled over her like falling snow, silent, heavy, undeniable. Winter Promise didn't belong to Aaron alone. It belonged to two boys, one she loved and one she had never known existed until now. "Professor," she whispered, "John was injured in that rigging accident at the community pavilion." The professor froze. "He was what?" Vivian nodded. "I saw the report. He was there. He saved someone. And his right hand was crushed." Harris looked devastated. That hand was a gift from God. To lose that, all because some contractor decided to save a few dollars? Vivian felt sick. The contractor was Whitmore Construction. Harris looked at her with a mixture of shock and sympathy. "Your family was involved?" "I didn't know," she said softly. "I never knew. And he never told me." "Perhaps he wanted to protect himself," Harris murmured. "When the powerful hurt you, you learn to stay quiet." Vivian stood, pacing the room. "I need to talk to him." "Be gentle," the professor warned. "A man like John carries pain quietly, but it's deep, very deep." Vivian knew that already. She had seen it the moment he looked at her, as if she held the power to break him without even trying. She thanked the professor and walked out into the hallway, the truth swirling around her like a rising storm. As she reached the stairwell, her phone buzzed. Derek. Again. She ignored it. Then she received a text from her father. "Lunch, today. Mandatory." She almost laughed, sharp and humorless. She was standing on the edge of a revelation, and the men in her life wanted to talk about business optics and family image. She stepped outside into the winter air. The sky was pale, clouds hanging low like the city was holding its breath. Vivian whispered to herself, "John Reed. You finished the song Aaron left behind." And then, with a dawning clarity that shook her to her core, "You've been carrying a truth that belonged to both of us." Meanwhile, across town in a dim maintenance hallway, John felt something shift in the air, an intuition prickling his skin, a strange foreboding that the past he had run from was finally catching him, because at that exact moment, Vivian Whitmore had begun the journey straight toward the heart of his most guarded truth. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would remain buried now. John's day spiraled the moment the corporate attorneys left him standing alone in the basement corridor. Their polished shoes clicked away, leaving behind the suffocating echo of a past he never wanted to revisit. All morning, he moved through his tasks like a man walking underwater. His breath stayed tight, his injured hand throbbed in dull, rhythmic pulses. Worst of all, Naomi sensed it. When he picked her up after school, she studied his face carefully, small eyebrows furrowed in a way far too mature for her age. "Daddy," she said softly as she climbed into the truck, "you look like when you get those nightmares." He forced a smile. "It's nothing, Starshine. It doesn't look like nothing." She reached over and held his injured hand gently, the one that still bore the faint ridges of scars. "Did someone hurt you?" The instinct to protect her surged in him, primal and immediate. "No one's hurting me," he said quietly. "I just have a lot on my mind." Naomi nodded, but she didn't look convinced. On the drive home, she hummed a tune under her breath. "Winter Promise." His heart twisted. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. Naomi shrugged. "You hummed it while making breakfast yesterday." John swallowed. Of course he had. Even when he tried to bury the past, pieces of it seeped out like water through cracks. When they reached home, Naomi rushed to the kitchen to start her special marshmallow cocoa, which was mostly marshmallows with a hint of cocoa. John lowered himself into his worn recliner, letting the soft creak of the fabric wrap around him like a familiar sigh. He stared at his right hand, the hand that once carried his dreams, now a constant reminder of everything he lost. He whispered to himself, "Why is she digging? What does she want from me?" He didn't know the answer, but he feared it. Across the city, at that same moment, Vivian was arriving at Whitmore Tower for her mandatory lunch with her father. She stepped into the private dining suite, a room designed to impress investors with its floor-to-ceiling views and discreet service. George Whitmore sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a glass of bourbon in hand even though it wasn't yet noon. He smiled when he saw her, but it wasn't a father's smile. It was a strategist's. "Vivian," he said warmly, "sit. We have much to discuss." She took her seat stiffly. A waiter poured sparkling water into her glass. "I've reviewed the holiday gala reports," George began. "Derek says your behavior raised concerns." "I don't answer to Derek," she replied calmly. "Ah," he said, swirling the bourbon, "but one day, as your husband, he will share in this company's leadership. You two must present a united front." She stared at him. "Dad, do you hear yourself?" He waved a hand. "Spare me the moral lecture. I know you're upset about the song that janitor played." "He's not a janitor," she interrupted sharply. "He's a maintenance technician, and his name is John Reed." George paused, glass suspended midair. "You've learned his name." "Yes, I've learned more than that." Her voice tightened. "You knew about the rigging accident in 2007. You knew Whitmore Construction cut corners." George stiffened, but only for a fraction of a second. His expression quickly reset into cool authority. "That was handled," he said. "Efficiently." "Handled?" Vivian's voice rose. "Dad, a teenager lost the use of his hand, his future, his career." "The liability was contained," George replied. "Everything was settled appropriately." "No," she said, shaking her head. "Everything was buried." George leaned forward. "Vivian, stop. You don't understand how these things work. Our empire relies on keeping certain matters quiet. The world isn't fair. Business isn't fair. You stay on top by controlling the narrative." Her stomach turned. "Even if people get crushed underneath it?" "Especially then," George said, "because those are the people who can't fight back." Vivian stared at him, feeling something inside her shatter, not loudly, but decisively. It was the realization that the man she idolized as a child was the same man who destroyed John's future and walked away without a second thought. "I can't be part of this," she whispered. "You already are," George replied. "But you can redeem yourself by stopping whatever nonsense you've begun. Leave the past alone." She stood abruptly. "I won't." George's voice hardened. "Be very careful, Vivian. Not everything buried should be dug up, and not everyone survives digging." She walked out without another word, her pulse pounding, her determination solidifying like iron. That night, long after most employees had gone home, she returned to the tower, not to her office, but to the maintenance level. She found Mrs. Langford first. "Do you know where John is?" Vivian asked. The older woman raised an eyebrow. "Miss Whitmore, are you sure you're ready for whatever conversation you're walking into?" Vivian nodded. "Yes. He's in the boiler room," Mrs. Langford said, "but he's got a storm around him tonight. Approach with care." Vivian took a slow breath and headed down the dim corridor. The boiler room door was slightly ajar. She stepped inside. John was leaning against the massive boiler unit, head bowed, one hand braced against the metal. The low thrum of machinery filled the room like a restless heartbeat. When he sensed her presence, he straightened, eyes sharpening with something between exhaustion and warning. "Miss Whitmore," he said quietly. "This isn't a good time." "I know," she replied, stepping closer, "but I need to talk to you." "I told you already," he said, voice tight. "There's nothing I can say about that accident. I know everything." His breath hitched. "No," he whispered. "You don't." "I saw the reports," she said gently. "I know you weren't at fault. I know the equipment failed. I know Whitmore Construction was responsible." John stared at her, jaw clenched so hard she could see a pulse in his temple. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Why now?" "Because the truth matters. Not for people like me," he snapped. It was the first time he'd raised his voice to her. Vivian stepped closer. "John, you finished Aaron's song." His face went still, completely still. She continued, "I know you were there in the practice halls. I know you listened to him. I know the music lived in you too." John's eyes glistened with something she couldn't name. Pain, memory, maybe even shame. "Don't," he whispered. "Please don't." "I'm not here to hurt you," Vivian said softly. "I'm here because I owe you the truth, and because I think you're the only person who can help me understand what really happened back then." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice barely audible over the boiler's hum, he asked, "And what if the truth hurts you more than it hurts me?" "Then I'll face it," she whispered. He looked away, breathing unsteady. She waited. Finally, he spoke. "You don't understand the cost of truth, Vivian." She met his gaze. "Then teach me." The boiler hissed between them, releasing a long exhale like the building itself knew a buried chapter was finally breaking open. And for the first time, John didn't walk away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The boiler's steady hum filled the room, a low vibration beneath their feet, like the building itself was bracing for whatever truth John was finally willing, perhaps forced to reveal. Vivian waited. She didn't interrupt. She didn't push. She simply held his gaze with a steadiness he wasn't used to from people in power. It unsettled him. It softened him, too. John exhaled slowly, shoulders dropping as if releasing a weight he'd carried so long he forgot it was there. "I wasn't supposed to be on that stage," he began. His voice was rough, scraped thin by years of silence. "I wasn't a performer. I was just a kid who cleaned the practice rooms because it paid enough to help my mom." Vivian felt something tighten inside her. He continued, "But I listened. Every day, every night, I heard things people never knew they were sharing. Aaron was one of them." He paused. "Did he ever tell you how much pressure he was under?" Vivian nodded faintly. "He told me some. Not everything. He wanted so badly to create something new," John said. "Something honest. Something that wasn't just another graded assignment or expectation. Winter Promise was that thing." He looked down at his hands. "I used to sit in the back row and listen while he played the first part over and over. I could hear the ending he wanted. I could feel it. But I never told him. I didn't think I had the right." "You did," Vivian whispered. "Maybe," John murmured. "But life didn't give me much room to think that way." He cleared his throat. "The night of the accident, I wasn't even scheduled. The usual cleaner was out sick, and I picked up the extra shift. I thought I'd get a few minutes to practice while nobody was watching." His eyes darkened. "I heard the metal creaking before anyone else did. I knew something was wrong." Vivian leaned in, barely breathing. "I saw a girl violinist standing right under the rig. I yelled, but the music drowned me out. So I ran." His voice cracked. "I only meant to shove her out of the way. I didn't think about myself. I didn't have time to." Vivian covered her mouth, emotion swelling in her throat. "John." When it fell, he continued, his tone hollow. "It hit my hand first. My hand absorbed the weight before the rest of me hit the floor. There was this sound, like wood splintering, except it was bone." Vivian felt tears sting her eyes. "You saved her." "Didn't matter in the end," John said quietly. "The report said it was my mistake, that I was messing with the equipment, that I panicked." "That was a lie," Vivian said fiercely. "I know that now." He gave a bitter half-smile. "Your company needed someone to blame. And I was perfect, poor, unknown, disposable." Silence stretched, heavy and sharp. Vivian closed her eyes briefly, fighting the burn of guilt clawing through her chest. "John, I'm so sorry." "It's not your apology to give," he said, though not unkindly. "You were just a girl back then. You didn't know what the Whitmore name could do. But I know now," she whispered. "And I will not let this stay buried." His face shifted, fear, anger, disbelief flickering through him like a flicker of faulty wiring. "Don't do this," he said. "You don't understand what your father is capable of." "I don't care. You should." He stepped closer, voice low and urgent. "George Whitmore is not a man who accepts responsibility. He's a man who protects power at any cost. Then I'll deal with him." "You're not listening." His frustration broke through. "He crushed me to save himself. What do you think he'll do to his own daughter if you become a liability?" Vivian's breath hitched. The truth of it lingered like a shadow. She knew her father's ruthlessness. She'd seen glimpses. But she had never been the one standing in his way. Not like this. Not yet. "John," she began. But he shook his head. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Let it go. Forget what you found." "I can't. You need to." "I won't," she said, stronger this time. "Because what happened to you wasn't just a mistake. It was injustice. And justice doesn't disappear just because someone with power wants it to." John stared at her, really stared. As if he needed to memorize the shape of a woman who spoke about justice with conviction rather than convenience. He whispered, "Don't make my fight yours. It'll break you." "Or," she replied softly, "it could heal something in both of us." Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion he tried to bury but couldn't. He turned away, gripping the railing beside the boiler. His injured hand trembled. Vivian stepped closer. "Is it because of Naomi?" His breath caught sharply. She had hit the truth directly. "You're trying to protect her," she said. "You think digging this up will take something from her." "I know it will," he said. "I've seen what men like your father do to people who question them. I can survive it. But she won't." "You won't lose her," Vivian whispered. "I won't let that happen." He turned back to her slowly, eyes full of warning and disbelief and something painfully vulnerable. "Why?" he asked. "Why risk everything for me?" She didn't look away. "Because someone has to. Because Aaron deserved better. Because you deserved better. And because—" her voice softened to a tremor. "When you played that melody, it wasn't just music. It was truth. And I can't ignore truth anymore." The room felt suddenly too small for the intensity between them. Emotion, history, shared wounds all swirling into something neither of them fully understood. John stepped back again, struggling for composure. "Vivian," he said quietly, "don't follow me into this. I already have." His breath faltered. Before either of them could speak again, the boiler door creaked open. Mrs. Langford stood there, worry in her eyes. "Mr. Reed," she said gently, "you're needed upstairs." Then she looked at Vivian just 1 second. But in that second, she saw everything. The tension, the truth, the danger. "Miss Whitmore," she added slowly, "I think you should know. Your father is in the building. And he's looking for you." Vivian and John locked eyes, fear in his, resolve in hers. The truth was no longer buried. And now, the cost of it was coming. Vivian didn't flinch when Mrs. Langford delivered her warning. But inside, something bristled, an instinct sharpened by decades of navigating her father's moods. George Whitmore looking for her was never casual. It meant he sensed movement, sensed disobedience, sensed a threat, and he always confronted threats head-on. John understood that too. She saw it in the way he stiffened the moment her father's name was spoken. His gaze flicked to the boiler door as though expecting danger to materialize right there. "Go," he whispered urgently, stepping toward her. "You shouldn't be seen down here with me." "I don't care who sees," she replied. "You need to," he insisted. "Especially now." Mrs. Langford cleared her throat. "He's on the main level, and he's angry." Vivian took a slow breath. "Then I'll face him." John reached for her arm without thinking, then froze as soon as his hand brushed her sleeve. The contact lasted less than a heartbeat but sent a quiet shock through both of them. "Vivian," he said, voice low and raw. "Be careful." She held his gaze. "I'm not afraid of him anymore." "You should be," he repeated. "He destroyed my life to protect his company. Imagine what he'd do to protect his daughter's future." She softened. "My future isn't his to define. Then don't let him take it from you." She gave a small, steady nod. But one thing remained clear. John was terrified, not for himself, but for her, and that made her resolve harden into something unshakable. She turned to Mrs. Langford. "Where exactly is he?" "Heading toward the executive elevators," the older woman said. "Probably expecting you to run to your office." Vivian almost laughed. She wasn't running anywhere. She was going to him. She left the boiler room with her chin lifted, heels clicking down the corridor in sharp, decisive beats. She could feel both of them watching her, John with worry, Mrs. Langford with something like quiet pride. When she reached the main lobby, she saw him. George Whitmore stood near the central sculpture, surrounded by marble columns and holiday garlands. His presence filled the space, not with warmth but with authority carved from decades of being obeyed without question. His eyes locked onto her the second she appeared. "Vivian." His tone was cold, formal, dangerous. She kept her steps measured as she approached. "You were looking for me." "Yes." He slipped his hands into his coat pockets, a subtle signal that he was displeased. "I've heard troubling things." "From Derek?" she asked. "From several people," he corrected. "Your behavior lately has been reckless." She didn't blink. "Because I'm asking questions?" "Because you're asking the wrong ones," he snapped. "About a decades-old accident. About a maintenance worker. About matters that do not concern the CEO of this company." "Those matters concern me," she said, "because this company caused them." His jaw clenched. A muscle twitched under his eye. "Watch your words." "I've watched them my entire life," she said quietly. "But I'm done with silence." George stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Vivian, you have no idea how business works. The world isn't neat. Sometimes sacrifices must be made." "Sacrifices?" Her voice trembled, not with fear but with fury. "A boy lost the use of his hand, his future, his dream." "Insignificant," George replied. He was nobody. Something inside her cracked like ice under pressure. She took a step back, not because she feared him, but because she couldn't bear to be that close to cruelty. "You don't mean that," she whispered. George didn't look away. "I mean exactly that. And if you continue down this path, digging, questioning, interfering, you will make yourself expendable too." She inhaled sharply. "Are you threatening me?" "I am reminding you who you are," he said, voice smooth with condescension. "You are my daughter. You are a Whitmore. And you will not jeopardize everything I built because you feel guilty about some low-level employee." She held his gaze. Firm, unbroken. "His name is John Reed," she said, enunciating each word. "And he's not some employee. He's a man whose life you shattered and then buried." George's lips curled into something between amusement and annoyance. "You care too much," he said. "You always did. Even when you were a girl. Maybe caring isn't the flaw you think it is." "In business," he replied, "it is fatal." "Then let it kill me," she said. "I won't be part of another cover-up." George stepped in closer than he'd stood in years. His voice dropped to a whisper, sharpened by threat. "If you turn on me, Vivian, you will have nothing. No support, no fiancé, no position at this company. You think they'll keep a CEO who defies her own board? Think again. Vivian's pulse slowed, not in fear, but in clarity. If maintaining power requires becoming someone I despise, she said, then I don't want it. For the first time, George faltered. Just a flicker. A sliver. Then his expression hardened again. You're making a mistake, he said. No, she replied. I'm correcting one. She turned her back on him and walked away. And George, shocked, furious, unused to resistance, did something he rarely did. He called after her. Vivian. She didn't stop. Not this time. Not for him. When she reached the hallway leading to the maintenance level, she allowed herself a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her hands trembled. Her throat tightened. She had just defied the most powerful man in her life. And she felt free. Terrified. But free. She didn't go all the way back down to see John. She knew he needed space. She needed clarity. But she paused at the landing, resting a hand on the railing thinking of him. And while she didn't know he was leaning against the boiler far below, wrestling with his own fear for her, she sensed it. They were connected now by a truth neither could unlearn. A truth that would soon collide with the full force of George Whitmore's anger. And that collision was coming fast. As she stepped out of the tower into the cold evening air, she whispered to herself and to the man she had just protected without his knowledge, whatever happens next, you won't face it alone. Night settled over Atlanta like a thick velvet curtain, but inside John's small apartment, the shadows felt heavier than usual. Naomi was asleep, curled under her favorite blanket with the tiny stars stitched by Mrs. Langford as a Christmas gift. John stood by the window, staring out at the flickering street lamp below. His reflection in the glass looked older than his 34 years, tired, haunted, and carrying a storm he had prayed would never come again. He replayed every second of Vivian's confrontation with him in the boiler room. Her determination, her fire, her willingness to take on danger she didn't understand. She didn't know what she was stepping into, but he did. His entire life had been shaped by the consequences of crossing powerful men. He whispered into the empty room, "Why couldn't you just walk away?" The answer surfaced before he could suppress it. Because she wasn't built to walk away from injustice. She never had been. He remembered the few times he saw her on campus all those years ago, Vivian with her books pressed to her chest, gently correcting a professor who misquoted a legal precedent, or comforting a nervous freshman too afraid to audition for the winter recital. She had always been like this, even when she didn't notice boys like him. A sharp knock suddenly rattled his door. John tensed instantly, instincts kicking in. Trouble never knocked gently. He approached cautiously, checking the peephole. His stomach tightened. Two men in black suits stood outside, different from the ones earlier. These weren't lawyers. These were the kind of men who didn't write reports. They erased them. John's hand curled unconsciously into a fist despite the ache. He cracked the door just 2 inches, enough to show awareness without inviting threat. "Can I help you?" The taller one smiled, an expression that carried no warmth. "John Reed? Who's asking?" "Mr. Whitmore would like a word." John's heart dropped. Not with fear for himself, he had already lost everything once, but fear for Vivian. "Not interested," he said, starting to close the door. The shorter agent wedged his shoe into the frame. "Mr. Whitmore insists." John's jaw tightened. "I'm not going anywhere. Get off my property. He wants you to reconsider that accident report you've been stirring up." The taller man continued. "Old memories can be dangerous, especially when they involve high-profile families." John's pulse hammered. "I didn't stir anything up." "Maybe not," the man said with a shrug. "But someone close to you did." John froze. They didn't have to say her name. He grabbed the door with both hands, slamming it shut hard enough to make the frame shake. Their footsteps retreated slowly, deliberately, like a warning. When the hallway fell silent, John pressed his palms to the door, breathing hard. He felt rage rising, not hot and wild, but cold and precise. The kind of rage a man feels when the past claws its way into the life he built from its ashes. He whispered, "Vivian, what have you done?" Across town, Vivian wasn't sleeping either. She paced her penthouse with restless energy, replaying her confrontation with her father. His words echoed like poison. He was nobody. She couldn't get John's face out of her mind, how he braced himself, how he tried to protect her even while unraveling. She knew then that nothing her father said could deter her, but she also knew she needed help, real help, not corporate loyalty, not Derek's political games, someone who understood the law beyond the facade of boardrooms. She grabbed her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Vivian Whitmore?" a voice answered after 2 rings. "This is unexpected." "Hi, Mark," she said, exhaling with relief. "I know it's late. You're a CEO," he chuckled. "Late is relative. What's wrong?" Mark Simon, her former law school friend, now a civil rights attorney known for taking impossible cases. "I need to talk to you about a man named John Reed," she said. Silence sharpened on the line. "I know that name," Mark said slowly. "Accident case from '07. I tried to get access to his file back then, but the court sealed it. Someone up the ladder didn't want it reopened." Vivian sat on the arm of her sofa, gripping the phone tighter. "My father was behind that." A low whistle. "Vivian, are you sure you want to get involved in this? The Whitmore name is one of the reasons that case couldn't move forward." "That's exactly why I need you," she whispered. "John deserves justice." "Justice?" Mark repeated. "Or redemption?" She closed her eyes. "Both." Another silence. Then Mark said, "I'll help you. But Vivian, when powerful men get scared, they get dangerous." "I know," she murmured. "He's already moving against John." Then we move faster. After they hung up, Vivian grabbed her coat. She needed to see John, to warn him, to tell him she wasn't backing down. She wouldn't let her father hurt him again. But when she stepped into the private elevator, her reflection stopped her. She looked shaken, pulled, human in ways she usually didn't allow. This is no longer just about the past, she thought. It's about the future, his and mine. She drove through the quiet streets until she reached his neighborhood. Humble homes lined the block places where people worked hard, lived simply, and gave what little they had to neighbors in need. She envied the sincerity of it. She walked up to John's door and lifted her hand to knock, then stopped. Voices, heavy, male, threatening. Her blood ran cold. She stepped back into the shadows just as 2 black-suited men descended the porch steps, talking in low tones. "He'll get the message," one said. "He better. Whitmore doesn't want this blowing up. That girl of his is slipping. She needs a reminder, too." Vivian's throat tightened with fear and fury. They reached a black sedan and disappeared down the street. When the silence returned, she approached the door and knocked softly. John answered after a long pause, eyes sharp and wary. But when he saw her, the fear in his gaze transformed into something darker, anger laced with desperation. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "They were just—" "I know," she whispered. "I saw them." His jaw clenched. "Vivian, you need to go home." "No, this is too dangerous." "I don't care." "I do." The force in his voice stunned her. He stepped closer, every muscle tight with fear for her, not himself. "You don't understand," he said. "Your father won't hesitate. He'll ruin you. He'll hurt anyone you stand near, including me, including Naomi. This isn't a fight you can win." She swallowed hard. "John, I'm not walking away. Not from this, not from you." For a moment, neither moved. The winter air swirled around them, cold enough to sting, warm enough to remind them they were still alive. Then John whispered, "You don't know what you're promising." "Then show me," she whispered back. His breath shuddered, his defenses crumbled, and in the quiet of that winter night, while danger crawled ever closer, Vivian and John stepped into a truth far more powerful than fear, 2 lives intertwined by a melody, now bound by a fight neither could avoid. And the war with George Whitmore had officially begun. The night wind whipped harder as John stepped outside with Vivian, closing the door behind him so Naomi wouldn't wake. For a long moment, they stood on the small wooden porch, The city's hum distant under the winter sky. The porch light flickered, the same way John's resolve flickered each time he looked at her. Vivian tightened her coat. "John, your father's men threatened you, and they threatened me. We can't ignore that." "Vivian," he said softly but firmly, "you don't understand what happens when you go after someone like your father. I've lived the consequences. You haven't." She took a careful step closer. "Maybe I haven't, but I'm learning fast. And I'm not afraid." "You should be." His voice cracked. "Because I am." She held his gaze, steady and unflinching. "You're not alone in this anymore. I'm choosing this. Choosing to stand with you." His breath hitched, not from the cold, but from the frightening tenderness in her words. No one had chosen him in a very long time. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed with a notification. He ignored it. Another buzz. This time, Vivian saw the preview flash on the screen before he could turn it away. "Attorney Mark Simon. Call me immediately." Vivian's stomach dropped. "Mark must have found something," she whispered. "We need to talk inside." John hesitated. His instinct was always caution, always protection. But he opened the door and let her in. Naomi remained asleep, tiny breaths rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. They sat at the small kitchen table, its surface scratched from years of use. Before either could speak, John's phone buzzed again. He answered. "Mark?" Vivian leaned forward, listening to the tense voice on the other end. "John, listen carefully," Mark said. "I got into the sealed files. You need to know something. Whitmore Construction didn't just cut corners. They falsified the entire safety audit, and someone helped them do it." Vivian's eyes widened. Mark continued. "The original inspector filed a report citing structural instability, serious faults. But that report never reached the county office. Someone in Whitmore's legal team intercepted it." John's blood ran cold. "So the accident, it wasn't an accident." "No," Mark replied. "It was inevitable. They built that stage to fail." Vivian's breath trembled. "Mark, who signed off on the falsified audit?" Silence. Then a name sharp, heavy, undoing everything she thought she knew. George Whitmore. Vivian closed her eyes, the world tilting. John stared at her, feeling the weight of her pain alongside his own. She whispered, "My father broke the law and buried it." "Buried it deep," Mark replied. "But here's the real problem. Someone else knew, someone who could expose it." Vivian froze. "Who?" Mark hesitated. "Aaron." The room fell utterly silent. John felt the air leave his lungs. Vivian's voice thinned to a whisper. "Aaron knew? How?" "He worked part-time in the records office back then," Mark said. "He saw the original inspection report and the falsified one. He confronted someone, we don't know who, but he wrote a statement half a page, accusing Whitmore Construction of negligence." Vivian's voice broke. "A statement? Mark, where is it?" "Missing," Mark said. "It disappeared the week before Aaron died." Vivian's throat tightened. "You think my father?" "I don't know," Mark cut in. "But whatever scared Aaron scared him enough to hide the only proof he had." John's heart pounded. If George knew Aaron had proof, and if he thought that proof could go public. Vivian shook her head violently. "No. No, Mark, stop. My father is controlling, ruthless. But he wouldn't, he couldn't." The words strangled themselves before they reached the surface. Mark spoke gently, but directly. "Vivian, I'm not saying he was involved in Aaron's death. I'm saying Aaron was trying to expose the truth, and someone silenced him. Whether through fear, pressure, or something worse, we don't know yet. But the timing is concerning," Vivian whispered. "Aaron never told me, because he was protecting you," Mark said. "He knew exposing Whitmore could hurt you too." Tears filled her eyes, not soft or sentimental tears, but tears ripped from the core of a wound she thought had scarred over long ago. John reached out instinctively, his hand hovering near hers, but he didn't touch her. Not yet. She looked at him anyway, as if feeling the presence of his comfort without needing its weight. "John," she whispered. Aaron didn't finish the song because he didn't have time to. John felt his own breath tighten. She continued, voice trembling. But you did. You carried the ending he never wrote. The ending he never lived to write. John swallowed, emotion choking him. That song wasn't mine alone, he said. It was his, and yours. And maybe it was his way of leaving something for us. Vivian wiped a tear with her thumb. And now we have to finish what he started. John stared at her. This woman who should have been an enemy by lineage, yet somehow had become the only person willing to fight for truth alongside him. If you stand against your father, he said softly, you'll lose everything. Your position, your inheritance. Derek. The board. Maybe even your safety. Vivian let out a small, broken laugh. Derek I can lose happily. The board too. As for the rest, she met his eyes with steady fire. Some things are worth falling for. Something inside John shifted quiet, seismic, undeniable. Before he could speak, Naomi stirred in the next room, calling softly, "Daddy?" He rose and checked on her, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. When he returned, Vivian was standing by the window, looking out at the distant city lights. She didn't turn as she spoke. Tomorrow, I'm confronting my father. Not as his daughter, not as his successor, but as the only witness left willing to speak. John stepped beside her. You won't confront him alone. She looked up at him, truly looked, and for a fleeting second, the pain between them softened into something fragile and warm. John, what if exposing the truth destroys both of us? He held her gaze calmly, the way he held fragile melodies with care shaped by loss. Then let it destroy us, he said quietly. Because what your father built shouldn't stand if it rests on broken lives. Vivian inhaled slowly, nodding. She placed her hand on the glass, looking out over the sleeping city. Tomorrow, she whispered. John nodded. Tomorrow. Two people from two different worlds, bound by a song, united by a truth. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tonight, however, in the fragile stillness of a winter-drenched Atlanta night, they stood together at the edge of a war neither asked for but both were destined to finish. And the winter promise, the melody born of love, loss, and unfinished justice, echoed silently between them, calling them toward the truth, waiting in the shadows of the Whitmore Empire.